Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for joining us for our webinar today. My name is Brian Flynn, and I'm the president at XTEL Communications. XTEL is a next-gen telecommunications company, and one of our main focuses is helping businesses like yours manage their network and keep them safe from cyber threats and attacks. Today, we'll be discussing cybersecurity best practices for businesses. In particular, we will be discussing best practices that can assist your business in receiving business and cyber insurance. Our goal for today is to share insights on top recommendations to make you feel more comfortable and confident about cybersecurity awareness and how it affects your business. We have a great panel to discuss this topic today, so let's get started. On the panel, we have Steve Cantor, Executive Vice President of KEH Insurance, Stephen Talent, CRO from Highwire Networks, Craig Sandman, co-founder of Symbol, and XTEL's own Ray Slough. You can expect each speaker to have the floor for about 10 to 15 minutes, and we'll conduct a Q&A at the end of the session. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type them in the chat window below, and we'll address them during the Q&A portion, which again will be at the end of the panel discussion. We'll start with Ray, who will be speaking on XTEL's endpoint detection and response service and tips on managing your overall network. Ray is XTEL's solution engineer and has been in the telecommunications industry for over 20 years. With that, Ray, the floor is yours.
Great, thanks, Brian. Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining. I'll be pretty brief. My name is Ray Slough, and I'm a solutions engineer at XTEL Communications. I've spent my last 20 years working with all types of businesses in a few different industry verticals. Working with small and medium businesses to find the right balance of IT security is something I've really enjoyed doing. Most of my discussions with XTEL customers include IT security or cybersecurity, whether it's from a compliance lens, an IT audit, self-assessment, which a lot of firms and companies are doing now so they can get in front of when they're asked the questions, and then adherence to an IT security framework. If they don't have a specific compliance related to their industry, start somewhere. There's plenty of frameworks out there that you can follow to make sure that your security posture is at least following another framework that's out there. We say it in the sales education process, cybersecurity insurance is coming, and they're going to have questions for you, right? It's only a matter of time. It's no longer, do you have an option of ignoring your cybersecurity, or if you know where the holes are and you're just not budgeting how to plug them correctly, you can't bury your head in the sand anymore, right? So a few quick things that you can count on today to take away to improve your cybersecurity posture is ask questions of your IT folks. And if you're the IT folks on here and need to ask for more money or more budget to have these basic things, don't be afraid. You can go to the next slide too, Rach. So a few quick things before we get into it is have a firewall. Make sure that you have a firewall, make sure that it's up to date. Have antivirus. Endpoint detection and EDR is the new catchphrase for antivirus these days, but make sure that you have an antivirus. Make sure that your systems are being patched and are being updated by somebody, whether it's an internal IT staff or an external MSP. Make sure that patching is happening. And then we all hear about multi-factor authentication, MFA. Make sure that you have MFA enabled on critical systems, at least email, and end user training, right? So one of the things that we're going to talk about today is I can have the best technology in place, but I need to train my end users on what to do and what not to do because they can leave the door wide open. So I'm really excited to hear from our panelists today. I'm excited to hear from Stephen from the cybersecurity insurance side of things. I think it's great to have an insurance vendor on. And then we'll talk about XTEL's products and how we're helping combat against cybersecurity these days with our endpoint detection and response product and our cybersecurity end user training product. So Steve from Highwire and Craig are going to be wrapping up in a little bit about that product set as well. So with that, Brian, I'll kick it back to you.
All right, thanks. That was great. Next, we have Steve Cantor, who will be speaking on cyber insurance, the ever-changing world of cyber insurance. Steve is the Executive Vice President of KEH Insurance and brings over 20 years of insurance services, sales leadership, and experience to KEH Insurance Agency, having spent the last 20 years with several different types of service provider businesses. Steve, looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Great. Thanks, Brian. If you can turn to the first slide, great. So in speaking about cyber insurance, I don't know who's on the call today, but I'll just make some assumptions, and that's to kind of give you a little overview of cyber insurance and what are some of the things that you should be thinking about when procuring coverage. First of all, I think from a state of the market right now, what's very interesting is prices right now have become flat. So we've come out of 2022 where we saw year over year renewals up 50% in many cases, sometimes 100% year over year. Most of that was really being driven from the fact that you had suddenly so many employees working remotely. And for my colleagues on the panel today and the team at XTEL, the risk profile changes dramatically when an organization suddenly is going from having an office to having remote workers. And what does that mean from a risk profile? So the second thing, so as a high level, cyber insurance was harder to obtain a year ago and much more expensive. It's begun leveling out, but claims rates are still fairly high. That's a general state of the market. Happy to talk further about that. The second thing to talk about is when you're procuring a policy, you're really looking at cyber risk. And in trying to address cyber risk, you're looking at carriers to potentially write you a policy. And my first point for today is to recognize that not all policies are the same. You can have what's called a business owner's policy. For those of you that represent small businesses, you get your general liability through a BOP, a business owner's policy, and they'll throw in cyber coverage. The difference between a throw-in of cyber coverage and what comes in a standalone single cyber insurance policy is dramatic. So my takeaway that I asked you to have from this morning is just to know that just checking a box that says I have cyber insurance versus understanding your coverage are two very different things, and what's included in a standalone policy is much more than is in a throw-in on a business owner's policy. The third thing I would say is you should think about the concept of having a risk team. And the risk team is about the people on this presentation today, because when you're trying to address cyber risk, number one, you're selling your risk to underwriters. They have to understand who you are. It's not just like you're going out into the internet to quote term insurance for a 25-year-old non-smoking male. The underwriters, they recognize that these claims are happening all the time. And to try to minimize the payouts, they want to build a profile of you. So we need to build a profile, and you need to have a team that works with you to make sure your profile is as appealing as possible to the underwriters that are going to quote your insurance. So in this first slide here, some of the things that go into your profile as a high level are class of business, right? So if you're an organization that collects healthcare data, that's going to create a certain risk profile that's assumed to be much higher risk. And if there's a payout on a claim, it's going to be significant. Your revenue size. A company that does $500,000 a year in revenue is considered less risky than a company that does 50 million or 500 million in business. Location. If you're in a state where there's some unique laws, like Illinois, Illinois has something some of you may have heard about, Biometric Information Privacy Act. So for those of you who have companies where you use a fingerprint or eye or face recognition, these are all things that the attorneys in this room or some of the other folks in this team can talk farther. I'm just giving high level. They're all part of your biometric profile. And if an organization is capturing that data, they are supposed to notify the employees that they're doing it. And if they don't notice them, the fines and penalties can be significant. So that's location. Internal controls, Ray spoke about this a little bit, but making sure that your team has put in place multi-factor authentication. The profile of you as an organization. Are you secure, not secure? Are things being tested? All this goes into trying to understand, are you a risk that they want to take? Because believe me, they don't have to take you, and they're more than happy to decline quoting. You don't want to be in that situation. And finally, claims history. Are you an organization that may have had a claim in the past, but how did you become a better organization from that claim? Did you build in controls? Have you done training? What are the things you're doing to make yourself more appealing from a risk profile? Next slide. Next slide, please. So when we look at cyber coverage, my message to you today is please recognize, number one point, not all cyber policies are the same. They're not the same. Remember again, what's included or thrown in on a business owner's policy is not the same as a standalone policy. And then in the standalone policy, you want to make sure that you understand the coverage. So our job as a broker is to work with our client in helping you understand what you're buying and to work with the team to make sure you're getting the best terms that are available. So some of the coverages include coverage for business interruption, right? What happens when you're shut down due to a cyber event? Dependent business interruption. You have a partner or vendor that their systems go down, and as a result, your business shuts down. What does that claim look like, and how much coverage do you have? Ransomware. It's always the same. I have to tell you, always, always, always the same. Nobody believes that they're going to fall victim to. My CEO, Brian Flynn, sent me an email and he said, go ahead and release the check. And it wasn't Brian, and the check was released, and now it's chaotic, right? So the question is, like in a social engineering event like that, do you have coverage for it built in? Don't you have coverage built in? Oftentimes, there's what's called sublimits for things like social engineering. So you might be buying $1 million policy, but for the social engineering part, you're only going to get $250,000. That's where, again, your cyber team here is so important, because you don't want these claims because they're ugly. And so you want training. You want to minimize the likelihood of these events happening. Next slide. So most important cyber coverages for 23 going to continue. We talked about social engineering. We talked about cybercrime, invoice manipulation. Just know things happen, like you can't believe it, but somebody hacks one of your systems and there's going to be a transaction. One of your clients is going to pay you. You've been working on a deal for 90 days. Now you've emailed each other and said, great, we'll send you the invoice. Next thing you know, your client gets that invoice thinking it's from you, but it's from the bad guys. Invoice manipulation happens. Again, there may be a sublimit. You've got to be aware of that. Next slide. Next slide. Ransomware claims data. Ransomware claims are up roughly 77% in the first quarter of 2023. So the concept of, are we being hit with ransomware? absolutely you're being hit. Organizations with 1 to 100 employees accounted for roughly 70%. So the old days used to be the small business owners that I would talk to would say, you know, the Russians don't care about me. I don't need cyber insurance, annoying insurance sales guy. You know, I don't need to buy this stuff. I get it. But the reality is it's happening. It's happening to really smart people with really good companies. It's happening. So build a team. I'll say it probably 4 more times in the next 3 minutes. You need a team. You need to be educated. You need to do your best to mitigate risk and then try to get the best coverage available in the marketplace. Claims will vary by industry, but they're happening, and it's becoming more and more expensive. Next slide. Some of the claims that we've talked about are here, so I won't go into all these details, but I think at the bottom there on a wire transfer, right, that's your invoice payments. In 2021, wire transfer fraud, 201,000, down from 392,000 in 2020. It's still a lot of money. There's a lot of money at stake here. And when the insurance industry is saying greater than 50% of policies are getting claims, you can imagine that the insurance world continues to be in chaos about how to price policies, how to structure policies. And the reason things like social engineering have a sublimit is because those claims are happening all the time. Next slide. Risk management, resources for clients. The insurance carriers are offering lots of different services available to you. So when you obtain coverage, it's important to talk to your broker to understand what are some of the services that the carrier will offer to you and take advantage of those services, and then talk to your cyber team. Let your cyber team know that these are some of the programs that the carrier is offering me through the policy, but work with your team proactively so that, God forbid, you have an event. When that event occurs, you go work with the carrier, work with the team. And again, as I said to you, I'll keep using the concept of your cyber team because, God forbid, you have an event, you just want to engage the team, which includes your carrier. Next slide. So this was something that CFC Insurance just recently posted, that ransomware funds transfer fraud for them and their company accounted for 83% of cyber claim costs in 2022. Massive number in ransomware and funds transfer fraud. So again, it's not an if, it's likely a when. Next slide. And this is the last slide. Focus here for 1 second across the first row at the top. Just notice a couple of things. Number one, if you're a lawyer or an accountant, consultant, professional services, hackers gain access to your business email and they remote your clients. So if you are in the business of advising clients, the bad guys are watching your emails. Maybe you need to put a message on all of your invoices and all of your correspondences, letting them know you will never email them a request to make a payment. Maybe you want to make sure they call you and confirm things. Again, work with your team to implement controls to minimize the likelihood of something nasty happening. Healthcare, man, you're collecting healthcare data, dealing with healthcare information, heads up. Those claims are expensive. Fines and penalties are really, really nasty. So next slide, I think that's it for me. I think that to just kind of end with a reminder, you need to practice what I'll say is cyber hygiene. And that creates your risk profile. When you're shopping for insurance, you want to have the best, most appealing profile so that the underwriters want to quote you. And you need to build a insurance program, not just a policy, because if you're serving on boards of organizations, if you have cyber claims, these claims are now elevating up into the boardroom. And as a board member, you could be at risk. So you need to have your directors and officers programs and your cyber programs working together. Thank you.
All right, Steve, that was great. Just a reminder for everyone, if you have any questions, just hit the Q&A button, which should be on the bottom of your screen. And next up, we have Stephen Talents, who will be speaking about managed XDR and NDR services. Stephen is Highwire Network's Chief Revenue Officer and brings over 20 years of managed services, information security, and leadership experience to Highwire Networks, having spent the last 15 years building managed security services practices within several different types of service provider businesses. Stephen, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Brian. I appreciate that. Yeah, so great stuff, Stephen. I think that the insurance situation for small businesses is very titillating and interesting. What we're going to talk about here is a little bit around the impact of cyber risk on the small business community, as well as some of the things that can be done to mitigate that risk. Next slide, please. So, I think, we can talk a little lions and tigers and bears here. I've been supporting and serving small businesses in a security capacity for 20 years. And things have changed over time. I mean, I can recall the first discussions that I ever had with small businesses, and most of those businesses didn't really recognize the risk that they were facing. Today, I think that is changing to an extent, but what we still see is that 60% of small businesses that are breached are out of business within 6 months of a cybersecurity breach. And there's a variety of reasons for that. But, we're also seeing that, a 424% increase in cyber attacks against small businesses in 2022. So the small business as a target is going up. More than 50% of cyber attacks actually target small to medium-sized businesses today, where, I would say maybe 5 to 7 years ago, the bad actors were really targeting the larger businesses because they had basically more assets that could be, taken from them. But, what we see is that, the small businesses spend an average of $955,000 to restore business operations after a successful attack. All the while, 60% of small businesses out there think they're too small to be targeted and attacked. And that's one of the conversations that I've had over and over again with a small business, environment, is that they feel like, hey, I only have 15 employees, or I have 20 employees, nobody's looking out for me. The fact of the matter is that they are actually the ideal target because they're less well defended than larger environments. And there's many, many more of them. And whenever you think about the way that bad actors are monetizing the cyber space, being able to gain access to a soft target or a less well-defended target is an easier way for them to convert their activities into revenue. So in 2023, that cybercrime rate is predicted to hit $8 trillion and about a $2.5 trillion increase in the next 2 years. So nothing's changing from the perspective of the SMBs as a target of bad actors. Next slide, please. So I think the critical aspects to understand are really where the threat conditions combined with the attack vectors that are really impacting businesses today. So what we see is a 205% increase in business email compromise from 2021 to 2022, and a 98% increase in that in 2023 alone. This is about $2.4 billion in proceeds that the attackers are gaining from small businesses. So, I mean, it's a big business from a bad actor perspective. Almost 30% of business email compromise attacks were opened by employees. So whenever you're looking at you got a third likelihood that one of your employees is going to fall victim to a business email compromise, whether that's a phishing, malware. These attacks are no longer as goofy as they used to be. I remember when I first got into the business, it was like, we have all your bases, and there was grammar errors and spelling errors. Those days are gone now with AI and a variety of different methods to include, English speakers, native English speakers, as a part of the community of bad actors. those attacks are becoming a lot more sophisticated. So you've got business email compromise, which is 98% of malware landing in environments that cause a business, a business to be breached are really coming through emails. So this is a major attack vector. Some of the other ones, that I think Stephen really did a really good job explaining is ransomware. I think we're all aware of ransomware. There's an 82% increase in ransomware attacks in 2021. And most of those were targeted at, or 82% of those attacks were targeted at 1,000 employees and less. So that is a big part, a big subset of the targeted sort of environment that the bad actors are going after. 37% of businesses hit by ransomware were fewer than 100 employees. So this is really the belief that, that there's a shift in tactics of the cyber criminals to leverage ransomware specifically against small and medium businesses, that have basically less well-defended environments. So 50% of small businesses that fall victim to ransomware are paying that ransom, and over 50%, actually 80% of the businesses that pay the ransom are attacked again. So paying the ransomware doesn't get you out of being attacked again. As a matter of fact, it indicates that you're willing to pay the ransom, and that you're a good secondary target or a follow-up target. 75% of businesses, couldn't continue to operate if they were hit by ransomware. So that's a scary statistic. Now, supply chain attacks are in a lot of scenarios, the small to medium business may not even be aware of the risk that supply chain attacks represent to them, but 633% increase in supply chain attacks over the past year. So really an acceleration of supply chain attacks. So we're now sitting at about 88,000 known instances of supply chain attacks, and literally hundreds of millions of those affected individuals are within small and medium-sized businesses. And really what's driving supply chain attacks is the vulnerabilities in open source software that are being used by small businesses. Imagine your CRM software, your HR software, your ordering and provisioning. Actually, business email compromise falls underneath of a supply chain attack as well, from the perspective that the email can be used to reroute payments and do all those different things that are oriented around different types of software that could be used in a business operation and leveraged as an attack vector. So, more and more businesses are relying on vendor supplied software. It's not just the small businesses using things like Move It, right? So I think we all saw the Move It thing. If you're watching Cybersecurity, this is basically a payroll file sharing application that was used by hundreds of thousands of businesses across the globe. And so supply chain attacks are going to be increasingly a vector of attack that is being used against small businesses. If you think about the different types of software that are being used in business for, management, monitoring, all kinds of things like that. We saw Kaseya, we saw, Okta. We're seeing basically supply chain risks impacting small businesses, increasingly impactful to small businesses. So flat networks are the other one, right? So you got that fourth primary vector is that most of the small business environments that we're working with, they're flat, right? That means that if, the CEO and a salesperson are all on the same network, and if that salesperson walks malware in on their laptop, the CEO's machine is directly connected to the device once it's in the environment. So there really is not much segmentation being done in small businesses today to reduce the likelihood of a lateral propagation of attacks. So this is a real sensitive aspect, and probably one of the easiest ones to mitigate, but still today we see 90% of small businesses have flat networks, which really allow for that lateral expansion of bad things once an entry point has been made into the network. Next slide, please. So lions and tigers and bears. Next slide, please. Hello. There we go. All right, so lions and tigers and bears aside, it is not a lost cause to be thinking about how good the bad actors are. They are monetized to the extent that they will continue to innovate their methods of attack. There are things that can be done to really reduce and limit the risk that small businesses face today. And one of the things that we find is that there's not any like, okay, great, I've been holding on to this $50,000 trying to figure out what I'm going to do with it as a small business. Maybe I'll just spend it on cybersecurity. In most cases, it's a scenario where that small business is newly allocating cybersecurity resources. So, small businesses spend anywhere from 5 to 20% of their IT budget on cybersecurity, but that's something that's growing as a recognition of that risk state. So if you're a small business looking to reduce risk, but need to do it over in a phased approach, that really is one of the best ways to move towards reducing risk. Is you can't do everything right out the gates. Budget may not support it, what have you, but there are things that you can do right now, and you can make the move towards a least risky situation in your business. For one, we look at some of the ways to quantify the actions that you can take as a small business, and we break that down into a couple different phased approaches of integrating more security controls. For one, sanitizing your network. For most of you that you have a firewall, maybe you don't. A next generation firewall is basic security measures, and it is literally your first line of defense as a business in protecting your network from the internet-borne attacks. And today, next-gen firewalls that you'll see, like the ones that you can get with XTEL Communications, the Fortinet firewalls, are fantastic at stopping a lot of malicious content from entering the network. The new firewalls today will look for behaviors and be able to isolate behaviors and do things to reduce your risk. And in many scenarios, it will also provide the ability for you to segment your local area network. And that's a key function in sanitizing your network, is scrub that internet traffic, make sure that there's not malicious code coming through the internet gateway there, and separate the critical jewels, the critical assets in your environment, whether it's the payroll server, whether it's the chief executive's machine, or whatever the crown jewels are, the most important aspects of your business. You can segment those off into an area of the network and only allow access to those things from operators that have the need to know or the need to access those things. So the firewall and many firewalls like the Fortinet firewall that you can get with XTEL have an ability to segment the network and provide a great deal of security around ensuring lateral movements are stopped of bad actors. And then we talked about business email compromise, right? Email security. If you did two things today, it would be about ensuring that you've got a top-notch firewall functionality with the ability to segment the network in the local area network, and business email compromise. That would get you at a risk reduction phase of 1.0, if you will. From there, you move into safeguarding devices, which would involve email security and endpoint detection and response. And you'll see that the managed EDR service being really around this, right? So it's securing those servers, those desktops, and being able to reduce the likelihood of a bad actor being able to compromise an endpoint and then spread the malicious code throughout the network. Patch management is key, right? So one of the things that you're going to see is that many operating systems that are running in your environment are running old code, and you haven't really made the move to patch those or update those machines to reduce risk. Patch management is a very inexpensive method to really reduce risk by ensuring that the different devices and servers and operating systems running in your business are running code that is secure and safe, and they're not going to be creating vulnerabilities that you'll see in many of these zero-day type of attacks that you'll see out there that leverage vulnerabilities in software and even in hardware appliances. And then you move into protecting identities, and in protecting identities, what you're looking for is to ensure that you're using multi-factor authentication. And for those of you that have been trying to get your organization to use multi-factor authentication, and one of the things I keep hearing from our partners and their end customers is that, oh, it's an inconvenience to sit there and do multi-factor authentication. It is an inconvenience that is likely to be one of the biggest impacts in protecting the identities and access to critical resources in your environment. Of all the things that you can do, multi-factor authentication is a critical one. And guess what? It's free. You can get dual factor authentication through Google for free, for Microsoft. I mean, it is something that there is no excuse to not use multi-factor authentication. It's a big way to improve the likelihood of not having a bad incident happen to an organization. And then XDR, right? As you start to move down the extended detection and response path, that basically is providing even an additional layer of security that allows you to take response actions to bad actors across everything in your environment, the firewalls, the servers, the endpoints, everything else. And then you get into continuous improvement, where you're really in a dramatically reduced risk state. You're in the 4.0 phase, where you're really incorporating cybersecurity awareness training for your operators, which will be covered here momentarily by the good Craig Sandman. And then Zero Trust, right, is implementing an ability to provide a Zero Trust environment. And what that means is only allowing access to things based on the need to know basis, right? Identity-based access control to resources in the network. And then vulnerability assessment is probably one of those key things as well that tells you where to focus your energies, where to remediate and mitigate risk in your environment. And again, vulnerability assessment is something that has now been made so much more addressable from a business operator to provide contextual risk analysis and basically a workflow process to support remediation of vulnerabilities in the environment. So next slide, please. This kind of gives you an idea of how to reduce risk over time. Now, one of the ways that Highwire Networks looks at this is that you've got this, this where do you focus your energies kind of thing. And really it's a result of an analysis of your risk exposure as well as your threshold for risk, right? If it's okay for you to be down for a day as a business or be down for a week as a business and you can still operate, maybe you're renting jet skis or something like that where it's like, hey, the systems aren't working, but I can still function. Your risk is dependent upon the business operations and your ability to sustain downtime or capital requirements in the event of a risk. But really the way that Highwire looks at this and the way that XTEL looks at it is, you've got a threat prevention functionality and detection and response functionality. And you need to be able to bring some of those different tools and capabilities to bear depending on where your risk is, and having a breadth of service offerings that allow you to convert the capital expense that is most commonly required to implement security measures into an operational expense. And what that means is you avoid having to make the capital investment to physically buy firewalls or to physically buy the software required for the endpoint detection and response, or to physically buy that XDR platform capability. And you convert that into a monthly recurring fee that includes the smart humans, the technologies needed for that, and the ongoing maintenance, monitoring, and management of the advanced security functionality. And to give you kind of a drill down into some of those, next slide, please. I'll give you, an example of that, sanitizing the network. Next slide, please. That sanitizing the network approach, that's step one, the most important aspect, and again, many of you folks may already have a great firewall that's out there. If you don't, really should be looking at XTEL's solution around next generation firewall. And really what the Fortinet of a device basically does is provide advanced security functionality in a cost point that's really designed for the SMB. It is a very powerful security solution that is very cost effective. And it's an hardware inclusive service. So again, you're getting away from the capital investment that could have been something that was holding you back from updating an old firewall. You're able to move forward with the best in breed cybersecurity technology at the gateway, and you can do that and have it monitored, managed, and supported through XTEL communications. So next slide, please. Then one of the other important steps in reducing risk over time is next slide, please, is endpoint detection and response. So, this is probably one of the most impactful and easily the largest consumption of security service amongst SMBs today. Most small businesses are spending on two things around security: endpoint detection and response. Replacing old antivirus and replacing it with endpoint detection and response, and then the business email compromise. So most small businesses are making those investments, and really what you gain with the managed and detection and response service here is basically a SentinelOne Complete license that is fully managed and incorporated with advanced functionality around automated triage and automated response of risk action. So one of the things that you'll find if you've worked with endpoint detection and response technologies, there are a lot of noise coming off of these technologies. They're squawking about anything they see as something that could be potentially a risk to the business. And really what you enjoy with the MDR solution through XTEL and Highwire is really a reduction of the noise that would be coming off of these endpoints, and a real focus on the risk states that are actually things that need to be paid attention to within those environments. So best in breed, SentinelOne Complete, look it up. It's one of the best endpoint detection and response technologies in the market. and basically you can get it through Xtel as a monthly recurring fee that includes the smart humans, the software involved, as well as advanced SOAR and SOC integration to support an ongoing risk reduction strategy. Next slide, please. So the next step up would be extended detection and response. And what this does basically is take the native functionality of detecting a bad threat and automating a response action that endpoint detection and response technologies do, and spreading that across the entire attack surface. So what you're going to see is that detection and response services are probably the fastest growing type of service in the SMB today, as the recognition that it's no longer about watching assets and making sure the light's green as opposed to red. It's about identifying a threat and being able to take an automated response action that's moving at the speed of the attacker. And the machine speed the attackers are leveraging is not being matched by the defenders in many scenarios. So when bad actors are taking seconds to get into an environment, the defense operation needs to be able to move at that speed. And that's what XDR does. So basically XDR is leveraging machine learning to isolate behavior and then being able to respond across everything in the environment, the cloud aspects, the Office 365 environments, the firewalls that are deployed, the endpoints, all of the different areas of the attack surface with a detection and response functionality that is in a machine speed capacity, making responses across that environment to reduce risk and reduce spread of a threat if an attacker does find their way into the environment. So next slide, please. You know, really what you're looking at here is you're looking at an ability to mitigate capital expense and gain some of the best security capabilities available. You're leveraging basically economies of scale to gain access to this type of technology and the type of enterprise-grade security functionality that big businesses have enjoyed for years. You're able to consume that and enjoy that type of protection in a cost-effective manner that is suitable to an SMB-oriented budget, really. And that's what you're gaining here from this partnership with Xtel and Highwire in delivering security services that match the requirements for risk mitigation, as well as the budgetary requirements that could be impactful to a small business. So easy deployment, fully managed, affordable subscriptions that include all the technology, the smart humans, and the operational overhead and the day-to-day, day in and out support and monitoring aspect. So we look forward to sharing more about the security services available through Xtel for the small business. But that at this point, I'll turn it on over to Craig Sandman.
All right,
Great, thanks. Go ahead, Brian.
Yeah, Craig, I'll just give you a quick introduction unless you want to introduce yourself, but I have something prepared for you.
Go right ahead.
All right. Well, finally, we have Craig Sandman, obviously, who is now speaking on compliance and cybersecurity awareness training. Craig is Symbol Security's co-founder. Craig brings over 20 years of IT experience in consulting with end users and has worked with a variety of managed security service providers. Craig, I can tell you this morning alone, I've received about 5 emails from someone claiming to be my payroll company. I have a feeling you may touch on things like that and how not to open those emails.
Yeah, that's life these days, isn't it, Brian? So thanks for the introduction. We can go to the next slide and we'll get you in and out of this about 10 minutes or so. Yeah, it's everywhere. So Symbol Security is really built to help companies become safer at the people level with respect to cyber attacks and how to recognize and diffuse them really without much technology. And that comes from education. It's the other half of the coin, if you will. In battling cybercrime is enabling people to be somewhat self-sufficient. We do services and we deliver them through Xtel for things like security awareness training, email and domain threat alerts, cyber threat surveillance, which is monitoring the dark net. And we do it in a way where we take the heavy lifting off of the customer and we run the programs for clients. So many customers are oversubscribed today. Their IT departments are very lean and they're dealing with one fire after another. So delivering the training for them helps them achieve compliance with regulations. There's 800 plus regulations that require
evidence of security awareness training, in addition to, as we just heard, many cyber insurance applications are going to also ask you for that type of information. So we get it done for you, and XTEL has been a great partner in that effort as well. Next slide. I'm going to skip through this because I covered the important parts, and so did my friends here previously. So the methodology is really simple. It starts with education, but it's followed through with testing and then continual monitoring of critical events that help us understand where we need to focus and refocus the education. So it's a constant cycle. It's different than you know, your grandfather's training, where in January you sat down with 2 hours worth of mandatory training, you checked the box, and then you didn't have to do it again until next January. So people don't learn much in that model. Our model is a lot more low intervals of touch, so a few minutes at a time, but spread out consistently over the life of the relationship, which allows the touch points to increase and provides a better ability for people to actually learn. And if you could skip 2 slides here, that would be great. Oh, nicely done. In terms of educating our employees, we heard about some scenarios. There's so many of them out there that are problematic. The first one, and probably the most important one, because it is the #1 entry point for cyber criminals, is teaching employees how to recognize phishing emails. There's a lot of literature on this, and unfortunately a lot of noise. The second thing we zone in on is validation. So it's very difficult today to, compared to it was 10 years ago, when you get a request from somebody, how do you know it's them? It's only going to get harder too if you've seen the prevalence of AI and you know, some of the deep fakes that are out there, both audio and video. What you used to know as reality needs to be checked and needs to be validated. And validation typically means a second means of confirming that you are you. If I get an email from you, I'm going to call you on your known phone number just to verify that I'm supposed to take this action. Segues into wire transfers and wire fraud. That's an easy way to pull off cybercrime. You heard about the examples earlier. If I had $1 for every story I heard from a CEO of how their CFO supposedly got a request from them to move money, I'd have a lot of dollars. Sensitive info, that's another important thing. In the past, you haven't really had to, except in some industries, people haven't had to be locked in on what exactly sensitive information is and how do I need to protect that and what can I share and what I can't share. Wi-Fi, the proliferation of Wi-Fi is a huge point of vulnerability and also need for education with employees, and that stems from Wi-Fi at partner locations and corporate locations, but also doing work from a coffee shop, a hotel, an airport, and then at home. If you're at home and you have a Wi-Fi system at your house, which you probably do, and you're working from home, now we've got a situation. And if cousin Joey comes over and also has access to your main Wi-Fi, he's got the password, that's not a good combination. So setting up guest networks and having some security at home is very important too. But in general, just understanding principles of safe Wi-Fi is very important. Finally, password hygiene, which I now immediately default to password managers. I'm a huge proponent of password management software to help you manage the realities of having literally hundreds of logins. If you are compromised at a personal level, it's very likely that you could be compromised at your corporate level too, which obviously creates a problem for your employer. So those are the things we educate on. There's a lot more. This is sort of like the top 6, if you will. Let's step back 1 slide because we're going to dig into phishing a little bit right here. Okay, so part of the challenge in people, companies educating people on how to prevent phishing, recognize phishing, is it's just a lot of noise. Like, please be careful and stop clicking on phishing emails. That message doesn't do any good. Can you jump down 2 slides now? What you really need to do is appropriately educate people how to understand what's in an email and how to recognize if an email is dangerous. So this is sort of like a picture reference of a spoof Netflix request. And basically this email is trying to pose as Netflix. It's graphically perfect, so you can't look at the Netflix logo and say, hey, I know that's not Netflix logo because it looks different. That doesn't happen anymore. Most phishing simulations and most phishing emails that come into your inbox are pretty accurate graphically, but there are little things that you can pick up on because they have to sneak these spoofs through the security software. So they might use weird characters. You can see in the upper right, like some of the letters look funny. But the foolproof way is really investigating the sender name. It's a place on the email that's safe to click. You can validate the sender name. In this case, you can't see it, but it's a super long domain name. It's not Netflix. If something's not coming from the source that it says it's supposed to be coming from, you have to disregard it. And then there's verification techniques as well, which we already covered. But part of cybersecurity education and security awareness training is cutting through the noise and getting to the few things that individuals can do to make themselves safer. Okay, we're not talking rocket science. This is 101 level, but believe me, across a population of employees, stepping up their education level from 0 or 1 to like 6 or 7 is a huge movement in de-risking your organization. Next slide. So again, just digging into phishing simulation because that's a hot one. There's a number of things we focus on: validating sender name, understanding the domain names and what that means, how to identify ones that might be manipulated. Hovering over links is a huge teaching moment too. So before you click on something, hover over it, make sure you understand where you're going. Finally, the last thing, which is general, but look, if it's a weird situation, like boss asked me for something that he's never asked me for, or HR manager, is asking me requests that she's never asked for before, call and verify. It's the simplest, easiest way to make sure that something isn't a scam. Next slide. And we already covered a lot of these, but these are some situations we see. ACH wire transfer scams, like you get an invoice and the invoice says, hey, we've changed our routing information. That's a red flag. And there's processes that your organization should have to follow those things. Your leader is sending you a message and needs something urgent, transfer money, urgent, but I'm in a meeting, so I can't talk. That's also a red flag. Phony invoices we talked about. And if it looks like your vendor, but the amount or the timing is different, then you really need to consider, hey, maybe it's a contact to the vendor themselves, not responding to an email, but taking that other verification technique, calling them and making sure that they've in fact sent that. And if you're getting requests for sensitive info over email, that's probably something you need to reconsider too, follow your processes there. And then if you're in organizations or charities or nonprofits or anything that has sort of high net worth people associated with it, those are huge targets. So odd requests for like detail about certain important people or financial information. And the reason I mention charities and nonprofits is there's sort of like a soft spot for people there from a security perspective, like, oh, I'm not going to give you a hard time because it's a charity. But really, you have to protect data, so safety comes first. And at this point, we can wrap. And thanks for your time. But if there's any questions, I'll gladly take them. At this point, I'll turn it back over to Brian.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah, we do have a few questions. Let's see what we have here. Well, this is AI, artificial intelligence, being used by hackers? I mean, the answer to that is yes. So I guess maybe a better question is, how prevalent are we now seeing artificial intelligence being used by hackers? And I guess that could be either for Craig or Stephen Talent.
I'll take it on just the security awareness training and kind of like phishing side. So what AI has really done for scams and frauds is now it's very easy to write clean, articulate emails. So before, especially if English wasn't first language for some of these cyber criminals, the text was kind of choppy. The English was sometimes not on point. AI helps with that because you can just go and get a concept, spit it into ChatGPT, and it's going to give you a nicely formulated paragraph. So that's probably, that's low tech, but that's probably the most critical advancement that AI has given on the scam side of things. And there's a lot of other things too.
On
I think
the actual exploit
about.
side of things, you know, the fact that machine learning is openly available to the world has allowed the bad actors to leverage machine learning to automate the reconnaissance and automate the breach methods that are used. So like we automate in the SOC, we'll automate what a human being would do, right? So for example, we'll automate the functionality of going through the step-by-step process of looking at something, you know, looking at threat intelligence, you know, quantifying its risk threshold, and then basically taking an action. The bad actors are doing exactly the same. What's more, now with AI, like you see with ChatGPT, you can actually ask ChatGPT to write malware. So if anybody's interested in that, go to YouTube and look up ChatGPT writing malware. And it's gotten, I wouldn't say it's gotten as simple as saying, ChatGPT, write me some malware that will get around SentinelOne Complete and CrowdStrike, but to an extent, it's like that. So literally AI is being used to write better malware and to intuitively write that malware in such a way that artificial intelligence is used to make decisions and actions in a rapid manner that are designed for the outcome that the operator is leveraging. So AI is really going to be changing the threat dynamic and impacting the way, not only the way that we're defending ourselves, but the way that the bad actors are operating. So absolutely a big new threat that you would probably say has been really resident on the scene for in the last couple of years.
Got it. Actually, decent segue to the next question for Steve Cantor. Given the changing climate, are the requirements for receiving cyber insurance, are they also changing and taking these new dynamics into consideration? Whether that's between, I guess, 22 to 23 or looking forward to 2024?
General right now, it's fairly consistent year over year. And my message is basically the same one about creating a cyber profile as far as risk goes as an applicant. You obviously multi-factor authentication at this point, if you don't have it, no one's quoting you. It's just, that's minimum. But once you start looking at all the things that were talked about today, I think it's fairly consistent that it's expected you have the controls in place and some basic training. So it's fairly consistent. Nothing much has changed.
Okay, great. I think we have time for at least one more question. So, and maybe this is for Steve Talent. So this question is based upon the location of their business apps. Most of this company's business apps are cloud-based. So I guess, generally speaking, does that make that company prototype more safe than a company that has most of their applications on, you know, a customer prem and more of a traditional local area network? And
No.
then the add-on to that is, I guess, EDR to MDR to XDR. So why don't you take that one?
Yeah, so just think about the usability of Office 365, right? You can use it anywhere. You can access files anywhere. You can make a change on your machine and then get in an airplane and open up a desktop somewhere else, and then basically access all the things that you're saving for your business in the cloud. So cloud-based SaaS applications have actually expanded the attack surface, and they're not any more secure than housing them in a physical location. As a matter of fact, they're more open to attack because they're so widely available from anywhere. So I would say SaaS applications that have only expanded the attack surface And there are different, there's easy methods to take to secure those around SaaS alerting and certain types of countermeasures that will help you with that. XDR will also help with that from the perspective of being able to see impossible travel, right? So one of the things that's the most common SaaS application attack is somebody basically opening, Office 365 and accessing spreadsheets, in Texas, and then 4 hours later they're accessing those same files from Moscow, right? That's impossible travel. Those are the kind of things that SaaS applications, the risks that face SaaS application environments, but there's reasonable methods of mitigating the risk there. But I would say that it expands the attack surface using SaaS applications. It doesn't reduce it.
Interesting. Okay. So no one's safe. We're all in imminent peril. Well, anyway, I'd like to thank anyone for coming out and participating in today's webinar. Hopefully you got something out of this. Thank you to the panelists. A lot of great information. And if you should have any questions, see sales@xtel.net. There's the phone number. If you're already an XTEL customer, reach out to your account manager and we can certainly talk about many of these things as well. Outside of that, thank you for attending and have a great day.